You know it.
Okay.
So it's now 7:13, Thursday, August 9th, regular meeting of the Cornwall Planning and Zoning Commission. Let's see, tonight we have regular members, James Laporta and Phil West, and alternates Michelle Ship and Bruce Bennett.
Seating Michelle for.
And we're going to seat Michelle for, why don't we do Stephen Siccardi? Actually, why don't we do Anna Tamel? And we'll seat Bruce Bennett for Christine Gray. Because we know they're not going to come even late.
Yeah, that's right. Steve Siccardi, I thought was coming too, but
Yes,
he
shows
pop
up.
in late.
Okay, you're good with that, right? Bruce and Michelle?
Yeah.
Right. Okay, so we've got approval of minutes from July 12th. Anybody have a chance to look at those questions?
Move to approve.
It would be you, Michelle, and Bruce that can vote.
Do I hear a second?
I second it.
All those in favor? Aye. Any
Aye.
opposed? Motion carries. New applications?
None.
None. Pending applications?
Done.
Still none. Staff reports. Come on, give us something, Karen.
All right, I am going to give you something.
Great.
Because now that Michelle opened the magic door about signs, there have been some dust ups about some signs in West Cornwall. Now that Frank's place is doing so well, there is a lot more parking all over the place. So we're having conversations about how people are sharing to be forward thinking about the progress being made in the village. So we're working on that. There's going to be some additional signage put down at Frank's place, which I'm approving, even though it doesn't quite fit the site plan, but it will alleviate some of the issues. And I want to say that the signage in West Cornwall is also indicative of the discussion for signage in Cornwall Bridge. Yep, the young woman from Newtown has closed on that property. The business offices, change of use is on my desk to be finalized. She's got her site plan in place and she wants to put some signage up because the interesting piece about West Cornwall is it's 15 miles an hour. You can see every sign because you're going slow. In Cornwall Bridge, there is actually, I have to say that the DOT encourages it to be very smooth sailing through. The signage that she would like to put out is going to be in the highway right away, which means that all of her signage, if it's permanent signage, is going to have to be back. And if you look at signage on buildings, when you're going by, it can be a problem if you can't read it because you're doing 50 miles an hour. So I think it's something that you all need to put on the back burner again, and also have some conversations with Gordon and the Economic Development Commission about, again, talking about crosswalks, maybe some traffic slowing measures or some other things that would make people be able to, have an economic recovery. There's been some issues about all the signage in front of the Cornwall Bridge Country Market, but I don't get in too crazy about it because I know that the one thing it does is it does slow down traffic, and I think it's as obnoxious as it can be to locals, it is also making people that are not local realize that there's something there. So it needs to be discussed. But otherwise, there's good things happening. I think some more home-based businesses that are being validated, that are out there and coming to the forefront, and that's a good thing. Yeah.
Thank you.
Karen, were you saying that the state won't let them put the signage in the state right of way?
Have signage in the highway right away because it's their property. If you look at the sign in front of the hardware store that we had issues with when they want to redo the sign. That sign, the edge is right on what is allowed in the highway right away. They have jurisdiction. It's their property that for sight lines, plowing, electrical, drainage and whatever. But when you come around the corner from Richard Bramley's and all those little islands into that parking lot, they're basically all in the highway right away, which if you see anything out there, it's usually sandwich signs. If you go to the bank, theirs is set back far enough on the circle that theirs is just out of the highway right away. But the country market, their island is completely in the right of way. That's why they have the banners and they have the ice cream sign that they can take in. So it's, it is what it is. And there are safety issues with signage that could cause somebody to have an accident if they couldn't see a car coming. But it can be detrimental to a business. The young woman that bought this business, she went back to the original
Karen,
signage.
do you mind specifically, what is is there a number? What property are you referring to?
Right across, it's right next to the
Rug shop?
fly shop. It's between Kennison's rug shop and the fly
yeah.
shop. It's the white building that has been office space for years,
Gotcha.
and now she's taking it back to retail. And the signage that was on when it was a pet shop is about 2 by 3 on the front of the building, and you can just barely see it if that's what she's limited to.
Yeah. And just a little backstory too, signs have come up a couple different times while I've been on the commission. Various people have had opinions about them back and forth also. And Janelle, it was our understanding a couple different times when signs came up about what we can actually regulate from the state statutes perspective. Our regulations actually we have quite a few regulations about signage in our regs, but I'm not sure how much of that is backed by what the state statutes say we can actually regulate from a sign perspective. So it is a little complicated in terms of how to move forward. We don't have ultimate discretionary powers potentially with signs, what we can say is allowed and what isn't allowed. Usually it's height, size, and location, as I recall, are the 3 main things that the state statutes allow us to regulate. So, there has been,
Guild.
I have a question, although I'm not sure that this is really planning and zoning or maybe more EDC, or I'm not sure which, but in the concept of trying to get to people know there's things to stop for around the corner, as you come into towns, they'll say like shopping with an arrow or like some notification you're coming into a shopping area. Would a sign like that be something that would be allowable, that like more like towards, I'm thinking like the gas station area before they even come over the bridge, so that they know when they come bombing down over the bridge, there's some kind of village center?
Yeah, my understanding is there was some discussion along that with recently, I think with the West Cornwall, don't they have some signage on Route 7?
There's one on there's one going north on 7 before you get to West Cornwall.
Yeah, shops, village.
Yeah.
that
And
whole-
usually I
Yeah.
think the selectmen, often kind of negotiate with maybe the state to see if we can put up signs about that typically, I don't think, as a regulatory agency from us, we just have our rules and regs.
Okay.
But I think
Well,
typically,
because that's on the state highway, so that's not even
Yeah.
ours at that point. And it's in Sharon.
yeah.
Oh, that's true. I forgot about the town line.
Well, the signage that you see that's up on the corner, that actually that was Jocelyn Air, probably 8 years ago. They got some signage where you see Goshen Fairgrounds, you see some things coming into Cornwall, and that was part of, I think it was either Steve Grant or some sort of collaborative municipal signage. But it had to go through the DOT and things like that. So it does take some doing, and it's going to take some collaboration with the selectman's office and maybe some recommendations. I don't think you can tell them what to, what to do, but I think everybody would agree that it's needed.
Yeah, I mean, as a part of the reformatting, we'll review what's currently on the books for the signage regulations, and what I'm doing along the way are highlighting these excerpts that are problematic, just from that, whether it's a statutory standpoint or there are some things to return to, just to update. So I think signs was a really important one. When Jill Cutler was chair, one of the first conversations I had with her was around updating those signage regulations. And to James' earlier point, there is a very substantial case, Reed versus Town of Gilbert, that really changed the way zoning can look at signage, and really changed the way that we can enforce the content of signs. Because you see in a lot of zoning regulations, there's allotments for different uses, like religious uses versus municipal uses versus retail uses. And to really try to get away from that is what sort of the cautionary tale of the Reed versus Gilbert case. So we'll get there. Signs comes up pretty soon, so we can definitely look at it with the perspective of where potentially changes can be made in the long run.
And speaking of Jill Cutler, I forgot that I wanted to mention something that happened this weekend. Yelping Hills, so the creation of Yelping Hills, which the yelping maybe came from a farmer's deaf mute assistant over 100 years ago, using horses and the noises he made, as opposed to like my grandfather's G and ha. He was like yelping at the horses to go, might be the reason for the name of Yelping Hills. But the Yelping Hills had a 100-year celebration. Maria Horn did come to give them a citation for their environmental stewardship and their community spirit up at Yelping Hills, but they are officially 100 years old.
Okay, thanks.
Yeah, and the only last thing I want to say, and this is just a clarification to going back to some things about signage, is if there are property disputes, if there's questions about town-owned land and versus private land, it is up to my office and the first selectman to make the determination. It's not taken lightly. We do go back and research things, but it is not it's not private citizens that can tell us to enforce what they believe is a violation of a neighbor doing something. It's a decision that we have to make based on our research. So that's that.
Thank you. Number 5, correspondence and communication. Pretty much covered that one. Other business.
Other business proper to come before the commission. I don't think I have anything. No, there was nothing that came in. Oh, excuse me, the request for a letter from the Cornwall Conservation Trust that came in on Saturday because they're buying some land, and that would be correspondence that I sent to you, James. We didn't send it out. So I think that I will work on it and try and bring it back.
So that didn't go to the whole commission.
No, it did not go to the whole commission. It came in really
They're
late.
gonna look for a recommendation or a, basically a blessing on our part, correct? And that doesn't need to happen at this meeting.
I don't believe it does. I think we can vet it because it came in so late. I've got 3 of them to try and figure out. Yeah.
Okay. Let's see. And anything, do you need to talk about any of the other permits that happened? They were pretty benign, right?
They're pretty benign, and there's 3 sitting on my desk as of this morning that are not on the agenda because I just could not get to them in time. So.
Okay. Number 7, planning workshop meeting. What we've all came here for.
Is everybody ready? Does anyone want to revisit anything before we jump into?
Can I have I just need 1 second. I need to answer my wife.
Of course. Yes, you can.
You haven't seen anybody else try to get in, right?
No, I have not.
Were you expecting a contentious meeting, Karen?
No, it's just, I have gotten some interesting emails in the middle of meetings that people were trying to get in or sitting over at the library looking for us.
Oh,
Yeah.
yeah. Well, while we're,
So you back?
I don't think he is.
I am.
Oh, you
You can go
are?
to library. I am. See,
Okay.
well, she's headed home, so she was just letting me know that she's leaving New Jersey now, so.
Okay. Before I jump into Article 9, specific use provisions, does anyone have any questions about past discussions? Need a little refresher? Or are we just gonna dive right in?
Well, can I just get like, how have the last couple gone? Because I haven't been here.
Yeah, feel free to review the materials, Phil, and if you
I
want.
will. I was just curious sort of how, like, are things moving along pretty well, or do we get stuck on anything in particular?
Moving along, I did revisit the use charts, so the use chart might be a really good thing because it sort of synthesizes everything that was said in that use table. We did update some terms, very thoughtful discussions. Nothing, I mean, no significant changes, if that's the
Okay.
big question that you're asking for.
Well,
lot
yeah, I just missed them, so I just
Yeah.
thought I'd get the feel. I did not watch them all on YouTube.
We
Sorry,
do
Richard.
not, yeah. I mean, the big thing, honestly, Phil, with overlay zones was a lot of reorganization, just making sure everything was in one place. And
Yep.
then for uses, we were just updating some terminology, making language a little bit more succinct. And in a few other cases, we were getting rid of some language that might seem a little bit outdated and just brought
Sure.
it into the 21st century. But the use chart, really good to sort of give you a snapshot of everything contained in that use table.
Okay, cool. No, I just thought I'd get caught up.
No, of course. And then tonight we're talking, so again, it's a really big organizational piece. I've been pulling different tidbits of the regulations from different sections, not changing a lot, and we'll get to it line by line, but really reorganizing. And now I'm alphabetizing our specific uses, and bringing in the update to farming and agriculture, just some more so housekeeping things so that we're getting specific uses in one place.
Okay.
So I'll grab the screen and we'll start right in. Okay, so, and because the document's getting large, I sent it just from overlay zones, so Article 8 onward, and I'm happy to send, you've all been sent this so many times, but if you do want a specific article, just let me know. Sorry for the scrolling, but we'll get, and then just one little thing. So once we get through the entire document, I'll be doing a lot of just formatting, looking at the numbers, looking at the page numbers, looking at the spaces. So just consider it a working document. Let's not get too nitpicky about that quite yet. I'm just mindful that that'll be one fell swoop once we get through all the content. So Article 9, specific use provisions, it's really discussing provisions that are applicable to specific permissible uses, and it applies to specific uses. So it gives a little bit more explanatory language or permitting criteria or conditions around specific uses. And this is all alphabetized and just using the terminology that we're seeing within the use table. So any terminology that was updated within our use chapter, we're now updating here. So you'll see accessory apartments and apartment uses is now the term that we're using. All of this language, as you'll see, very much is in black, and that's because it's not changing. So I've pulled in where this is coming from for everyone's understanding of sort of the genesis and the origin of where we're finding these things within the regulations. I'm not planning on going word by word through everything because this is very much a reorganization practice, but what I have done is highlighted some sections, which will be sort of the next step in our regulation analysis. And that's when, not at this juncture, but when we do get into some more substantive changes, the immediate needs that are a little bit of a red flag, either from a statutory standpoint or a case law standpoint. Not so much to workshop this language this evening, but just for the purposes of bringing it to your attention and maybe having a discussion around that. So the first highlighted section in this case is around who can use an accessory apartment. Really, currently the regulations are very specific about it being a spouse, a child, a parent, and making sure that we, when we get to substantive changes, get away from some of this language, just because zoning is about use and not so much about the people, stipulating the people using particular structures. So that's the first, accessory apartments, accessory uses. This is all carried over from the regulations.
Quick question, Janelle.
Yeah.
Right at the very beginning, that first sentence, regardless of their location in town.
Yes.
But then we go right in and the very first thing is talking about residential and residential zones.
Yep.
Is that something that some of these provisions are applicable just in various zones in the town and not townwide, right?
Yeah, so it will be indicated within our use chapter of where these particular uses are then allowed for. And it will also be stipulated in the use table through what process. So is it a zoning permit? Is it a site plan, or is it a special permit? And this introductory is carried over from the current regulations. It's just saying, regardless of where this is located, these rules will apply. Is that confusing?
Well, I just don't know. Should we scratch regardless of their location in town?
I would be fine. I would be fine with clear. I
It's a
love
little funny
clear.
if we have a use table of where the specific locations, where the uses are applicable. And it is specific, and is this an R1, an R3, an R5, or
Yeah,
right?
I would be
It caught my
fine with,
attention.
yeah, I would be fine with that language change. Again, I really don't want to go ahead and make any little editorial changes without a discussion from the commission, because this is your document.
No.
Yeah, so
Does anybody else have an opinion about that?
I agree.
Yeah, because we talk about different, there's different things that are allowed in different zones, right? So,
yeah, we're pretty specific.
yeah, I wouldn't, if there was a chunk of this that applied to all the zones, then yeah, but this is confusing. I would definitely vote to get rid of it.
Great,
Or not vote, but suggest getting rid of it.
I
great.
agree.
So Janelle, I have a question about an earlier part of this.
Before we move on, I just want to make sure that everyone's in agreement if we are
These
going
provisions.
to remove that.
Yes.
I
Okay.
agree.
Okay, great.
Thank
I'm
you.
ready for your thought, Bruce.
So this might come from James, but the list of the opportunity to be able to change, or create accessory structures that are 15 years or older to apartment use. Where did that come from, and why is that in there?
Current
Why is that
regs.
limit there?
I have the same question. I don't know the origin, and I've questioned it myself. And just because this exercise, I've really been directed, not to make these significant substantive changes. That could
Right.
be something that we certainly highlight when we are given the liberty to make some changes. Because I've always questioned that, like, why does one person with a building that's older have more of a right to do something than somebody else? From a
Good
legal
question.
standpoint, I worry about that.
I think you guys are testing my memories. I think I was involved in the discussion process at some point about this. And as I recall, the purpose of that regulation was to enable some of these larger, older existing buildings to be transformed to something that would accommodate an accessory apartment, and we didn't want to, it was to a change of use from something that was becoming unusable in another respect. Whereas if you have a newer building or somebody that's brand new, they're planning for what they want to do to it. That wasn't the intent of that regulation.
Oh,
I think it was something from like a historic, we were trying to get to some of these, you know, more archaic, larger buildings, and that was the intent. I don't know if it's applicable, what the commission currently thinks, but I think that's where it was. Karen, is that ringing a bell for you?
I think that's exactly right. It had something to do with, yeah, I remember the discussion with Tom McGowan, and if I went back, it had maybe even like in the village, in particular, in the villages, that it was
Yeah, that
Like-
sounds,
Like maybe the old Marblewood buildings.
exactly.
that's what came to my mind. What, I mean, again, not to go out on a limb and like suggest changes aside from the reorganization, but it might help the reader, just if something about, to encourage adaptive reuse of existing buildings, because that doesn't actually get stated. The 15 years gets stated, but the rationale behind the 15 years doesn't.
Yeah, and you know what, it's interesting because that change was what, about 10 years? So now we're already with the 15 years,
Clock is ticking.
we're almost starting to talk about buildings that,
You can soon change a building that was
Yeah.
built in 2010.
exactly, yeah.
Yeah.
I like
Aren't
that
we gonna be-
suggestion, though.
Yeah, I like that. Your wording right there was perfect. Adaptive
Yes.
reuse, whatever you
Adaptive,
just said.
yeah.
Yeah, it's such a good practice in planning, and I think it makes so much sense why one would want to retain large, old, what one might deem historic in some instances, buildings. So just, I think where we can state these things, that's sometimes where, newbies to the regulations like myself, because I wasn't here for some of the history, I like to understand what was behind that. And then it's so much more logical than when you just read, 15 years, why?
Can I suggest that you actually think about, can you get that verbiage in there? And then we can review it, at another final go around with the whole commission.
Yeah, I have taken good notes, and I've added that to the list.
Thank you.
And I am going to add one thing because it took a fair amount of conversations in my office in the past week. When you say adaptive reuse, and then we talk about how Janelle is taking out or suggesting we take out lot owner, parent, spouse, or child lot. Adaptive reuse can also mean that someone whose life situation has changed by the creation of an accessory apartment allows caregivers and people that an older house to be taken care of might really need an apartment that somebody can live in to take care of that person that's not necessarily a family member. And that's really on my desk right now because it's an emergency type of situation. Yeah.
Isn't this whole section on accessory apartments on the short list to get reviewed more detail?
That was my
And-
understanding. It looks like, just for the record, I think that's Steve Sicardi. He might be joining us.
And I was gonna say that, and also, isn't there some stuff in that new state regulation that was passed that applies to this whole thing? That maybe we aren't 100% compliant with?
Yeah, if you recall, Phil, the commission opted out of the language, so the
Oh,
P and Z of Cornwall doesn't have to adopt all of the
right,
language.
but we definitely mentioned that we intend to work on making it applicable so that all the good parts are there.
Yeah, and I think,
So-
I mean, my advice is just to get rid of any emphasis on requiring a familial relationship when it comes to the built environment, because I see that as a little bit of like a local government overstep where it's like, let the property owner figure that out and just
Sure.
allow for that use to happen and then let them decide. It is their property after it all. If they want a caregiver or their child or someone unrelated and unknown to them to live there, I just don't really see that being under the P&Z's purview.
Well, and honestly, like if somebody wanted to build a new house with an accessory apartment, that would, because their mother-in-law or mother is going to come live with them,
Yeah.
that would, they'd have to, they could build it, but they'd have to wait 15 years to make it an accessory apartment.
Yeah, and things change over time. So if a living situation is this person and this person, one cannot expect that that's going to remain that way in perpetuity. So I
Right.
think building that into our regulations, realizing that it's a little much to ask that a family member is living in an accessory apartment in this day and age.
Well, you remember the language that they used to call mother-in-law apartments. And I
Oh,
did
yeah.
have a friend of mine that said, well, there's something about his accessory apartment. He says, well, my mother-in-law died, so I can't use them. I'm like, oh my word.
Yeah, but some
Yeah.
regulations actually stipulate, and I think actually, Karen, as we move a little bit along, and this might not be in practice anymore, but it's basically saying, as we keep moving, it looks like you need to be alerted if anything were to change. Here we
Right.
go.
Yes,
So
I read that.
this is in red, and it's my red flag sign. Because it's basically saying that you need to be notified if this whole situation is changing. And I don't know if that's in practice in this day and age.
I would not feel comfortable going up and knocking on the door and asking who answers the door. No.
Yeah.
To
So
both
So-
doors.
Yeah, this was, I think, we were gonna have maybe a subcommittee formed in the near future to look at the accessory apartment regs in more detail to try to iron some of the stuff out, because there is obviously some focus that we want to put attention, but I'm not sure if how much we want to spend tonight on. So those are some pretty major things that we want to
Right.
really address.
Yeah.
But I would, while we're just looking at it, if somebody has some comments they want to make, I don't want to shut them down.
Yeah, I like that approach, James. That's my thinking. It's mostly just a teaching piece. The reason why I'm highlighting in orange and in red is just a teaching moment for everyone so that it's on our radar. And when we revisit this, that it's no surprise to any of us why we're talking about it and why we're possibly making changes. And also
Yep.
for the public understanding too.
So,
Just while you're on that page,
Yeah.
931C, I think
Yep.
there's a spacing thing with Article 10
Yeah,
and the colon
so
and parking
so-
requirements.
So Phil, all of these like formatting things, I'm definitely like, because it's a working document, it gets adapted every
That's
month.
fine. I just,
Yeah. I always appreciate your second.
when
set
they
of
jump
eyes.
out at me,
Yeah, it just so you know, it's sort of a moving document right now, and we'll get to
that's
the
cool.
point where the page numbers are gonna matter and the 9.5.2s are gonna matter and the spaces
All
will matter. But I appreciate that. Yeah, and then one other thing, I don't want to belabor accessory apartments, but it's not quite a red flag, but it's orange, so it's a little bit cautionary. The parking requirements is just not consistent with what one would require of a single family home without an accessory apartment. So looking for consistency is a big piece, especially as sounds like parking might also become on our short list along with signs to talk about in the near future so that we make some updates. A big thing in that recent state statute, Public Act 2129, was around parking and not requiring more parking for accessory apartments, because in any sort of more dense environment, parking is very costly to build. Not so much here, where we have the beauty of being able to pull several cars into our driveways at times, but just bear that in mind as we're going through like an accessory unit should not require more parking for a single family home. It just doesn't make sense.
Okay.
Great. So it sounds like accessory apartments, we will be talking at much more deeply in the very near future. And again, this was all reorganized, so it's alphabetized. And actually,
Oh,
and I realize now, and yeah, it took me a second. At first, I moved through the way that the regulations currently had everything, and then I thought, what is the most uniform, consistent way to do this? And I thought we should just alphabetize everything. So moving forward, antennas, towers, and wireless communications facilities, that is referenced as a separate standalone document completely. So it's not integral to our current regulations. How does everyone feel about that?
Where are you, Janelle?
Antennas, towers, and wireless communication facilities right up at the top here.
Got it.
Yeah. So
And even the document that we have is really outdated in terms of what is.
But,
Okay.
but that's one of our documents, right?
I mean,
Well, it's the document, but it has a lot in it that you no longer have jurisdiction over. It's kind of it's more of a guidance document as opposed to a regulatory document.
got
Karen,
it.
isn't the siting council pretty much do whatever they want to do with that? And don't they just seem to overlook town zoning regulations? I think even wetland
For the most part.
issues.
yeah, as I recall, because I know my business partner Ray first was dealing with that a lot in Warren when that was going down. And they, at the time, this was some years ago, and at the time they said it was still helpful to have regulations in place, even though they didn't have to formally abide by them. They could use them as guidance of what the town was having recommendations for. So even though they really don't have to play by the rules, it's nice to have some rules in place that they at least can see.
Yeah.
That was an argument that was made. I don't know if that's still applicable or, but anyways, that was. I mean,
Well, I will just preface one of the last cell towers that went in off of Popple Swamp Road. The whole issue that had gone back 10 years was the access to the cell tower at 25% grade is not something that is preferable to anybody or anything in terms of access and being able to manage or maintain or whatever. And when it did go through the siting council, the first thing that happened basically was that there were problems with the access and the impact on downstream wetlands, it was basically, this is what we said will happen. Boom, there it was. So if you went back to the history, there was substantial information that the siting council should have listened a little bit more to the town. Yeah.
Got it. So for now, I will just leave this as is, referencing a separate document that's available, and just leave it as is. Then we
I
get
would add it as an appendix, so it was in
Okay.
the same document, I think, down the road.
Karen,
right?
do we
So-
have that scanned?
We have it scanned in someplace, yes.
Okay, whenever you can email it to me, I'll work it into the appendix. Yeah, Phil, to your point, I think just the intent of the reorganization is to have this be a comprehensive document, so everything's in the same place.
Right.
Yeah, one thing that I
So you don't
will,
have to go back to Karen again and say, hey,
Yeah.
now I need a copy of this too.
yeah, and also digitize our resources. So the zoning map
Right.
is not just referenced as being in the town's clerk's office, but it's also in our document that one can pull up remotely from the comfort of their own home.
Right.
So then we get into apartment use in a business building. Again, not much to see here, other than I just highlighted the fact that the parking is a little bit inconsistent with what standardized parking requirements are. And then we
Did you
move
want
right.
to highlight secondary how and size after part D?
Oh, yeah. So this is just, yeah, this is again, more for like a later date. It's notes to myself, but also notes to all of you. So as we're in this, as we're in this regulatory process, it's also a really good moment for us to understand our regulations. And it's questions that I get when I read the regulations, just from, I understand what this says: the total livable floor areas used for apartments must be secondary to the total floor area used for business purposes.
Mhm.
And I'm thinking it's secondary in size, but it's not specific. And there's specific things that I just am curious about. And maybe we can add it if,
Yeah, I was just thinking that that secondary how and size should be highlighted. It's not part of our regs, right?
yeah, it's anything in italics. There,
Oh, yeah, I see that now.
it's
Okay.
in.
So it's italics, yellow or red.
It's like, yes, and blue for statutory changes and
Okay.
green for editorial changes.
Got it.
But the italics is more just a note where I read this and I'm like, secondary, it's not specific,
Got it.
and it's just me begging the question. We don't need to
There's a,
address
bu-
it.
there's a bunch of work to do for this subcommittee.
I mean, I think long-term, the document, zoning regulations are always a working document. So I
Right.
think there's always work to do.
Right, but it'll be good to have, yeah, okay.
Yeah,
Cool.
just bringing these sort of thoughts to the forefront as we go through the regulations so intimately. But we don't need to answer that right now.
Yep.
Okay. So moving along, we get to attainable housing cut. This should be relatively fresh for everyone. Coming from page 25 of the current regulations, this was adopted less than 2 years ago, I do believe. Maybe, seems like it was a long time ago. So that is a use of property, and it just gets into the specifics behind it.
Yep.
Then we get into farms, farming, and agriculture. And a lot of you probably are familiar with, well, Phil and James, I'm hoping, with the 2019 document that was adopted. It's 4 pages when the zoning regulations concerning farms, farming, and agriculture were changed.
Yep.
And they never really worked their way into the regulations, so they were standalone. So now what I have done is I've taken this 4-page document and worked it into our regulations so that we have it and that
Yep.
we can reference it and use it. And then we're also tying our definition of agriculture into the statutory definition. A really interesting thing just for all of you to understand, the most recent change to that statutory definition does involve adult recreational cannabis. And we don't have to go into this discussion tonight, but I just want this more as like, just to be aware that general state statutes, they do change over time, which is why I've added this language here that says as amended. And just the big thing to bear in mind is what the state is stipulating is that adult recreational cannabis production is not an agricultural use. So it's basically saying one cannot come into town and just start producing adult recreational cannabis by right, because it's agriculture, if that makes sense.
Yeah.
The state's not defining it as agriculture.
No, they're
Okay.
very, very.
Well, they also
specifically
have some specific permit things around
not. Massively.
who's going to be allowed to grow it and where, so.
Yeah, they're
Is it-
very specific.
Well,
Is
that's
it-
good to know, actually. That's,
Yeah, just.
Isn't there something coming up too that, sorry to derail a little bit, but you
No,
brought
it's
it up.
okay.
Isn't there something that we have to determine at some point here about
Opt-out.
cannabis, opt out or opt in?
Well, there's no opt-out provision, but there is the opportunity for planning and zoning commissions to address the legislation. It's Public Act 21-1, the responsible and equitable Adult Recreational Cannabis Act, and then it's been updated. It's now an act concerning adult cannabis. At some point in time, the commission probably should just address the fact that this is a new license type that might be available within town. So it is definitely a moving topic in planning circles with what's
Isn't that
happening
supposed to,
here.
doesn't that go into effect like next year? Is
It's
it?
been
Or is
in
it-
effect since October
No,
1,
but
2021.
no, but wasn't there a delay on when they could open up dispensaries?
The applications are barely refined right now with the state. So the state is taking their time getting through the legislation themselves and adopting and updating the application process. But
Yeah, because I thought
applications-
there was a stagger of when the different parts happened, and I couldn't remember like if there was something that we needed to do at one point for any of them.
At some point, it's certainly important that the commission address the fact that adult recreational cannabis is now available for 9 potential licenses in any municipality across the state.
Yep.
Some are production and some are retail, and really for the commission to have a discussion around if they want to allow any of those 9 licenses, and if they do want to allow any of those 9, where, if at all. So,
But not tonight.
yeah.
No, I knew it was coming, so I didn't know
Yeah.
like if that was gonna
Thank you, Dave.
interrupt or something.
Janelle, can I go back to the farming? I
Yeah,
read the
sure.
Connecticut General Statute, Section 1.1. Is there a financial requirement for a farm producing and selling a product to be considered a farm?
Not that I am aware of, nor should the commission be concerned with. Are you,
Well, so that somebody could grow a garden and sell 5 tomatoes and they're considered a farm?
yeah, I mean, if they wish to be, it's because, so Connecticut being a right to farm state, definitely celebrating our agriculture and really protecting it and being supportive of it has really been a piece of the zoning regulations that we've seen across the state. And I think particularly in Cornwall, just being farm friendly. And if anyone wants to deem themselves a farm, I don't really see Karen going around and saying, you're not a farm.
Look, I'm a farm boy, so I'm all for farms, but
Yeah.
But
Well,
Bruce,
I get
there's
your question.
there's another part of that. The definition of agriculture, and this comes up in wetlands, for
well,
instance.
that's where I was going.
Okay. If your child is a 4-H'er and has a horse, that horse can pasture in and around wetlands because it's an agricultural animal is defined. It doesn't make the property a farm, but the animal itself is an agricultural entity, a horse, a pig, a chicken, a whatever. So, and I've gone through this, over the years, because there have been issues, especially with animals. Well, it's not a farm and they can't do this and they can't do that. Forestry is another one. Timbering is agricultural. Logging roads, parts of the landscape, because a lot of Cornwall was agricultural 100 years ago. So the whole agricultural piece is very interesting, because as you saw what happened with Sweet Pea, the definition of agriculture can be interpreted by the Planning and Zoning Commission, by the Zoning Board of Appeals, or by a zoning commission, or in the case of a wetlands commission, that something could be agricultural. Cleaning out of a farm pond, even if that farm isn't being used all the time for haying, the maintenance of a farm pond can be perceived as being agricultural.
As I read that general statute,
I
it did
know,
indicate
I
that if you
know.
have a horse you can categorize your property as long as it's greater than 5 acres as a farm. I just wanted to make sure I read that correctly.
No, I went through this in Cornwall because of a wetlands issue with a horse, and I was clearly straightened out by the head of the inland wetlands agent, the state agency, about the definition of agriculture, which is protective of small farmers, kids, 4-H, which is under the Department of Agriculture. Maple sugaring operations for somebody has a sugar house on their property and have their taps on other trees. It doesn't make the sugar house non-agricultural because they don't have all the trees. There's all of these
A lot to it.
ways of interpreting agriculture, and it's supportive of trying to maintain the right. If somebody has a victory garden and their kids want to sell tomatoes on the street and whatever, does it make it a farm? No. But is it agricultural? Is it encouraging for people to have
But
gardens?
there is another element there, right? You can't, I mean, our zoning in town is still residential zoning. And you can't, as I understand it, put up a barn without having a house just to house goats if you're not going to make money on it, right? You don't, isn't there has to be a financial aspect to your business in order to,
The assessor might have a financial aspect to it. The assessor has the right to put certain things in agricultural exemption or not to put something. They can put a vacant piece of land with a barn in agricultural usage if the person has declared that they're going to use that in conjunction with the rest of their farm. Then this has come up. It's a really tricky situation. The assessor does and I get this question all the time. Well, the assessor says one thing, well, and says I can, and I might say you can't. So.
Mhm. So it's up to the assessor to determine whether it's a farm or not. That's what it really comes down to.
From a tax standpoint,
Yeah,
certainly.
from a tax standpoint,
Yeah.
yeah.
From a use standpoint in P&Z, as you'll see, many things fall into that Connecticut general statute definition.
Okay, thank you.
Did that help answer your question?
Yeah, it left me knowing that it's as confusing as I thought it was.
Yeah, yeah. I would not want to be the CEO on a court case, whether like deeming something as a farm or not a farm. I would not want to be the test
Right,
on that.
me either.
So then farmers market, and again, what I am referencing, and let me know if anyone has never seen this sort of standalone 4-page document. I got it from Anna. And if anyone does want to see it when it was adopted in the language as is, please let me know, because it was relatively recent, 2019, January 15. So all of this farmers market is also from there. The one thing, and this is totally an aside, the P&Z is requiring farmers markets to only be on the weekends, never on like a weekday evening, which is, I get it, that's the way it always traditionally is, but I just find that interesting.
Yeah. I'd like.
You know,
to
you bring up an interesting point, because every
Yeah.
morning they're listing the farmers markets. Like today or yesterday, there was one in Litchfield, there's one on Monday, and like
Yeah.
Thursday in Torrington. So now there's farmers markets every day. We're the Saturday farmers markets. So I guess now there's other towns are not limiting it to weekends, but we're pretty.
I saw this.
Yeah.
I saw this in the regulations, and then I just scratched my head because I was like, why limit it? But
I think we should, let's highlight that if you don't mind, because I think that would be nice to change. I don't see why that should be a problem with, I think it would be welcoming for the town to at least invite the option that the farmers markets don't have to be on the exact same time.
yeah,
The simultaneous farmers markets could actually maybe both work if they were.
some evening
Well,
farmers
They could
market.
already be Friday, Saturday, and Sunday. I mean, Sheffield, I think, has one Friday evening. which I
Yeah.
thought was brilliant, which is
Yeah,
when everybody
everybody's
comes up from
coming
New
up.
York, they grab their stuff and they're home for the weekend.
Yeah,
Well,
And
if
the-
you remember when the farmers markets regulations came in, there was a whole issue about where one could be put, like the Berkshire Country Store is in a residential zone. So it had to be in the GB, which was the Wish House, or on town-owned land. So that's why you
Yeah.
have, but it was actually the Saturday and Sunday, or the Saturday farmers markets was to encourage also the use of West Cornwall, to encourage the farmers market to draw other people into the businesses in West Cornwall on the weekends. And it was
Yeah.
really a little bit of an economic development initiative as opposed to a agricultural piece.
yeah,
Mhm.
cool. So it's in my notes and highlighted just to visit in the future.
nice.
Great. So then all the provisions of the farmers markets, then we also get into agricultural accessory uses. They're subject to a special permit. Just so that is very clear and all in one place and in the regulations now. So that includes farm stores, food-based farm products and fiber processing, farm vacation stays. So this is all part of that 2019 amendment that is not currently living within the regulations, the full document that everyone has. And then we get into the culinary and farm harvesting related products. So definitely an update. And then we get
Can I-
into,
Could
What's
I
that?
quick ask a question?
yeah,
The whole definition, the revolving question about the definition of agritourism, has there been any statutory changes in terms of a clear definition of what crosses the line from agriculture and agritourism?
no statute. I do know some towns that are taking a crack at updating their own regulations. And what I've seen the state has not been passing that down. And I think it's probably because it will be difficult and maybe controversial. And it seems very unique to each particular town and just the way that each particular town wishes to address it. I have been working with the town of Morris to deal with agritourism, and they're actually not really addressing agritourism as a topic, but they're now thinking through having a special event permit that doesn't necessarily hinge on agriculture, but if something's not a bona fide agricultural activity, it will need a special event. So if you're thinking like the wedding and the food truck night and the fireworks that may not actually be integral to agriculture, they're looking at more as like it's an event, it's not actually agritourism.
If I may be,
Yeah.
the White Barn still always is the one that causes people to rethink what agriculture and agritourism is. Yeah, the big White Barn in Morris, yeah.
Stay
Yeah,
tuned. Yes, that's going to public hearing this month. I will report back.
Thank you. I would
It's
love
been
to
in the
hear.
works for about 2 years. So definitely addressing events is a new thing. I think post-COVID, a lot of towns are seeing we're congregating again and that towns don't know how to deal with that. So we're definitely updating some rules around just making sure events are safe is sort of the bare bones concept behind some of the rules. But not to get too into the weeds, then we get into home businesses. I'm sure many of you are familiar, recently updated. That was July 1 of 2021. So that's just home businesses are now in here, home office, minor home businesses, nothing new. We're now
Yeah.
referencing those uses within our use chapter and our use table.
Janelle, before we go into that, back to the
Yeah.
farm thing, if I could do it.
Yeah.
On 6, when it's farming and agricultural special permit, under
Yeah.
there, the farm property shall be a minimum of 5 continuous acres. I
Yeah.
read somewhere else that you can have a farm in a 1-acre residential area. Is there a
So-
conflict there?
This is unique to Cornwall. Did you see that in the Cornwall regulations with the 1 acre?
I read it in this document that we're looking at right now somewhere.
Yeah, and you know what? I will need to look for that conflict because that rings a bell.
Yeah.
And I do know because this was adopted in 2019, now will be our time to clear up any of these conflicts.
Mhm.
When I came across this 5 acres within the 2019 update, I definitely had a moment. My thinking is very much the same as yours.
Yeah, if we can outline that and then go back to.
Yeah, and just for I mean, since we have such a small group here this evening, does everyone want to keep this 5 acre thought? Are we more into, hi Steve? I haven't, are we more into the 1 acre or is there like no thought, we don't want to get involved right now?
I'm into the 5 acre.
So this pertains to, hold on.
It is in our regs now, 828 -1, the farm property shall have a minimum of 5 contiguous acres. But I'm just looking under, that's on page 54 of our current regs, but it might, the 1 acre thing might be in our latest revision of the farm regs that I don't think got incorporated in here.
No, that's what's in front of you right now. Yeah, that's
So,
the latest revision.
yeah, so,
I feel like we should have a discussion about not having that minimum 5 acres. If you think about how much food could be grown on 1 acre, allowing people to farm that 1 acre could increase the amount of food that is produced for people in the community. It would not prohibit the average person from being able to have a farm stand and generate food. So I would like to highlight that for discussion to reduce that minimum.
Great.
I think, Michelle, to that point, you're seeing how people can farm and create just by good farm design, that they can, it's not your typical farm fields that we had years before, that there is much more understanding of crops that revolve, like cover crops and this and that and the next thing, that there's multiple use forests, can have cows in them that you can, do all sorts of things. And then going back to the horse, the 4-H horse too. Yeah.
Well, I
So,
think that
but-
this also goes, I think that this goes back to the fact of what is a farm and what's the description of it. And, when you're talking about 1 acre, can that really be a farm? Or should that be stated as a farm, and should we clarify that? I think that's really what
So-
we're
But
dealing with.
this 5 acre, the 5 contiguous acre piece, that applies to all the uses that are in 5 right above it, right?
no,
What's this?
So
I'm trying
my
to figure out what the
understanding, so just, yeah, and Phil, this is a good discussion. So the context of what we're discussing is anything requiring a special permit needs to have a minimum of 5 acres. So
Right.
it's very specific right now. It's not necessarily saying a farm property has to be 5 acres, but it's saying,
Oh,
should you wish to apply for a special permit? But the confusing thing about this is
Interesting.
there's nothing about what the special permit could be for. All
No,
it is,
but isn't .5 accessory uses subject to a special permit? Right
yes,
above .6, right? So those would be the things that this applies to, because those are farming things that require a special permit. So to have one of those 4 things,
gotcha.
A, B,
Yeah.
C, and D, you would have to have 5 acres.
yes,
Yep. And just having not been involved with that development process of the 2019 update, that's really good knowledge for me to have and to understand.
Right, so if you want to have a farm store, or farm-based products and fiber processing facilities without room for product display, or farm vacation stays, or farm product culinary or farm harvesting related products, then you would have to have a special permit, and that would have to be on 5 acres or more. Because everything else farm related, we allow in any zone.
Correct.
Yeah,
That
Right.
clarifies it. That's good.
I would
Yeah.
suggest, Janelle, maybe you switch .5 and .6 so that you have the requirements first and then you, does that make more
Well,
sense?
isn't this just I mean, those are the things that are subject to the special permit, and the requirements for that special permit are that you have 5 acres.
Right, so then that does bring like, so I misinterpreted, so it's what happens to the people who have a 1 acre or a 3 acre lot? They don't have
They-
to have a special
just-
permit, or they can't
They
do it?
just can't have a farm store, food-based farm product, those 4 things that are listed in the section just above it.
So if we reduce that number, then they could apply for a special permit and they would be allowed to have that.
Right.
Right,
Oh, they'd still have to meet the special permit
Right,
process.
I-
they'd
And
have to go through that process, but they would be eligible to go through the process, whereas right now they are not.
Right.
Correct.
and I think just to clarify it, and James, just to your earlier question of flip-flopping the way that the amendment was written, what if for 0.6, we had it read farms, farming and agricultural accessory uses, subject, like requirements, so that it ties in with 0.5 so that it's understood.
yes, so it should be
Yeah.
farms, farming and agriculture accessory
Use
uses,
requirements.
permit requirements.
Yeah, so that I just think something needs, like, and it can also reference, what I can do is reference like C 0.5 above, so that it's clear that they're
It might
Yeah,
be,
I think you just need to add in accessory uses after farming and agriculture, just add in accessory uses.
yeah.
And then it's especially use special permit
I
requirements.
would
and then-
think it would be under the same number. In other words,
Oh.
.5, farm agriculture accessory use is subject to a special permit. And then as a subset of that,
Requirements.
Well,
the
think
requirements
that-
for it, because otherwise it's like it's a different point. You know, you
Right.
want
or
it's
well, one is
it's
what
applicable
one is
for
what you
that
have to,
statement.
one is what you have to have a special permit for, and one is the requirements of that special permit.
Yeah, but it's still tied to that. It's still tied to .5.
I mean,
Well,
if you
then it
just,
would be a .2, right? Then it could be
Yeah.
.5.2.
Yeah,
Yeah, I agree. I think .2 might be the solution, and then just adding in accessory use requirements to that 2019 amendment so that it's crystal clear.
Yeah,
Cool, cool.
and then that's A, B, and C are those requirements.
Yep.
Yep.
Perfect. Then anyone else on agricultural farm? Okay. So then we get into home businesses. I think, as I was stating before, not too new to all of us. So recently adopted. This is just all pulled in from page 42 verbatim, and it's now included within our use chapter. It's a bit long. Then we get into mixed uses. So that's very briefly mentioned, and it's mentioned on page 22 in the current regulations, just stating that the commission may allow more than one permitted non-residential use to be conducted on a single lot in a GB zone, provided that all activities are conducted within a single structure or attached structure, as in a shopping center or office building. The lot and the buildings thereon remain in single ownership, and all other requirements for the zone are complied with. So that's pulled over. And just Bruce's earlier comment around conflicts, there is a conflict within our current regulations, and I think Chairman Tamel has brought this up before. I don't know the exact page number. I believe it's pretty early on in the regulations. There is a sentence that states that there may be only one use allowed per zone. And that was something that, just given discussions around the allowance of mixed uses, and also there's homes and farms on the same lot, and there's also homes and home businesses on the same lot, getting rid of that universal language, because it is a conflict.
Yeah, that's like page 1 of the regs, I think.
Yeah, it's pretty early.
Yeah.
I have it highlighted. Because what I am doing as I'm moving through the reformatting, we will, when we meet towards the end of this exercise, I will go through the regulations and just talk about what's not making it in there and why. And hopefully everything that will sort of sink to the bottom is just going to be a conflict, or going to be something that the language was changed and it was cleaned up, or that we made a little bit more succinct. So instead of putting it in multiple places, we just have it in one spot.
Okay.
You guys will know the regulations so well. You'll be so. Then mobile homes, I struggle with this one because I don't know how applicable some of like the more traditional mobile home regulations are. But what's really useful here, and this all comes from page 22, is the temporary use of mobile homes. This comes up in many towns and it's not often addressed. So I was really quite impressed to see the fact that Cornwall has been addressing it. And Cornwall has also addressed the fact that mobile homes are considered as single family dwelling units. That's a big statutory thing, that, you know, over time, mobile homes have sort of adapted, and they're not what one thinks of as like a mobile home park that we saw historically. But temporary uses are allowed for mobile homes. There are specifics which are all stated in here. I've then highlighted a few areas of concerns, one being that who uses a trailer. You never know, what if we are taking in someone that like needs to retreat from a flood and they don't happen to be related to us? It might be nice to take them in and not make them be our family. And then just the language, if construction is being duly prosecuted, I don't normally use language like prosecuted when I'm talking about construction, but that's just a me thing, sort of understanding what is construction that's duly prosecuted.
That was funny. I looked that up, Janelle, when I saw it to say, it's a strange word.
Yeah, I think of lawyers when I hear that term.
Yeah, right.
I see Michelle's hand.
I have a question about mobile homes and uses. I see all of them being around construction and things like that. Is there anything, and this falls back to farming and agriculture, is there anything that allows a temporary mobile home seasonally for, say, field workers or whatever kind of thing, that something little housing village might be set up, not a village, not a big word, I didn't mean that, not that many, but you know, one or two things that you could have workers have housing while you're doing work for your agriculture. Is that addressed anywhere?
No,
No,
So
That's
that
a
would be
big-
something
that-
that we would need to write in as a permissible use then.
Michelle, that's a
You're
big
bringing
deal
up a-
with the federal government creating housing for your workers. So that would be very,
It should
very
be a big
involved.
deal for all of us. I mean,
It's a big
honestly,
deal around here.
It
Real
is.
big
I
deal.
mean,
In New Hartford, yeah.
like the people who across from Housatonic Meadows that bought that old place and made it housing for his workers when he's up here. I just, I think that addressing worker housing, be it temporary or permanent, is something that we really need to look at. So that would be an easy way to provide seasonal help if we had housing for them. And if we allow it for a year to build your house, why wouldn't we allow it for a short period of time for agriculture purposes? Something to add to the list, please.
Yes, adding it, taking notes right now. Great. Such a good point. Okay. So moving off of mobile homes, then we get into permanent sawmill for limited commercial use. That is a use that is mentioned as a special permit use in R3 and R5. And if this is just the stipulations around that special permit use, definitely something that was in there and was of something of the past, but certainly applicable today. So all of this language has just been brought over. The one thing that I highlighted was just around your employees. Again, like limiting employees to members of family. I just see no place for the P&Z to be the person taking that on, especially if it's just not really appropriate.
Realistic.
Yeah, and not like very economically development friendly or other things. So just highlighting that because it was an area of concern when I was reviewing the regulations. And then the one other thing that I highlighted is just this piece on Torrington area health noise regulations,
Right.
because they no longer have
Right.
jurisdiction. So they rescinded, they do not want to regulate noise anymore. So just to make sure that we don't sound outdated at first glance of our regulations, and maybe we can just say, we can make reference. So if you remember, we have a general requirements, which is Article 3 of the updated regulations, and it just talks about what's acceptable as far as noise. Maybe if we just reference that here, rather than reference Torrington area health here.
So
Yeah.
Janelle, I have maybe a question to James. I was really
Yeah.
surprised at the extent of information that was in our zoning regulations that control this. It's almost as though it's like a major occupation in our town, these temporary sawmills. Where
Yeah.
did all this come from, and why is it so extensive? And
That's,
frankly, I think it's a little dangerous to be.
This is a historical hubbub that happened on Cream Hill 40 years ago or more.
Yeah, I was gonna say it was way before my time.
This
Yeah.
was when Larry Stevens wanted to put basically a portable sawmill on Cream Hill Farm. And that's when they came up with this.
Got it.
I
And
mean, is it possible to, and I don't know, remove an entire section of zoning?
Bruce, I've tried, and not at this juncture. I'm not allowed.
Well, it is a good point, because I thought we had discussed it before with, sawmills are really under agriculture, so
Right.
we don't have necessarily the state's, backing for us to limit them to the extent that we're probably trying to here.
Right.
I think, when we do talk about we're trying to bring our regulations into compliance as well as up to date, I think we should look at things like this and consider highlighting the whole section saying, is this applicable? I have no problem with revisiting that. The sawmill regulation, it does stand out as something kind of off. It's like, are we going to talk about beehives next? And say,
Right.
Like,
Exactly.
why pick on sawmills? So,
Right.
so that's, I think that is fair game for us to look at as a commission and actually say, is this, what's this about? If this is a 40-year-old problem related to one incident, then maybe it should be readdressed.
Right.
And
Agreed.
two thoughts. James, the way that you've linked sawmills back to agriculture, really helpful angle, because at this point in time, a part of our exercise is bringing the regulations into a sound statutory place. So if the commission deems that it's appropriate, possibly getting rid of it now as we're working on our rewrite, and then also getting rid of it in our use table and use chapter. And then my follow-up thought is just from my experience, to answer your question, Bruce, anything that's been a really controversial issue tends to be like that very detailed regulation that doesn't seem to make sense in context now.
Yeah, and there's a lot in here for this.
Oh, my God.
Yeah. I
This was
mean,
like the cell phone towers 40 years ago.
yes, and we can, I don't know, because we're not a full group tonight, if we want to sort of report back when the group is more full and just say, we're really at the point where we are are thinking of getting rid of the permanent sawmill regulation, especially now since we're cleaning it up from a statutory standpoint, if that's the approach that everyone wants to take.
Yeah,
I
I
think we
would
should
think
just-
just the four of us should just sneak it in right now and don't tell
Oh,
anyone.
totally. I
Sure.
agree.
Well,
And we'll
I
tell
mean,
them
I don't
later.
know what happened.
but
No, that's an
they
excellent
also,
point.
I mean,
I mean-
it would cut down the document by a few pages.
And there's
know,
actually
if-
5 of us now because Steve's here, so,
Oh,
you
right,
know.
sorry, Steve.
You know, all of you, if you did what I did this week, which was to go to the book. I have one here in New Hartford, and it was a book prepared by the Cornwall Historical Society about Cornwall. And I went to the section on Cream Hill. There's been some questions about what's going on in and around the area and forest management, et cetera, et cetera. And right on the first page is the sawmill that sits right on the top in Cream Hill, the historic sawmill, which is related to what you see on the landscape in terms of old woods roads and logging roads that were part of a larger farming activity, which was a historic sawmill. It's very
Well-
interesting to see the historic pieces. Yeah. And where do you go on that? Where do you go?
well, I have a question here too. I mean, it doesn't really, we don't really define what a permanent sawmill is either.
No, I know.
Because, I mean, the sawmills have changed so much in the past 40 years.
Yeah, and obviously for us to say, why regulate it, but there is the other side of the coin that, if somebody puts obnoxiously, loud, commercial scale sawmill in a 1 acre zone, we're gonna have some issues. So,
But by not having it in your regulations, there's not even that mechanism for it to
Right.
happen.
Exactly.
Other than through agriculture, and I would argue that it's not agriculture if it's a commercial operation
Yeah.
in the way of a sawmill that I'm thinking of. So by having it, you're entertaining the possibility of
Right.
having
yeah,
one.
I agree. Yeah,
Yeah. I'm for taking
I
it
live
out.
next to
Right.
I live next to a sawmill, so we won't even go there. Yeah.
Oh, yeah. So it sounds like you guys want to nix-say the sawmill.
Yep.
Yes.
Okay, I
Well,
like this group.
is everybody in agreement with that? That was kind of a offhand.
Yeah, I don't know.
Oh, let's
I
do
don't
it,
know.
but-
I'm not 100% certain on it. I mean, because we are a limited meeting tonight. That's a little on the I don't know. in case someone else has-
Aggressive.
Yeah, I'm fine with revisiting that, but
I would just revisit it.
Let's report back to our chair and just let her know where our discussion went. Steve, do you have an opinion about keeping it in or taking it out, or more so just briefing the others on what we're up
Yeah, I
to?
would just a little brief others, and I don't know if it's not really a big deal, just leave well enough alone. It's just going to create controversy. Look like we're trying to sneak something in or sneak something out.
Well, see, so this is what I want to change. Anytime that there's a change, I don't want it to always be taken that it's being nefarious and sneaky.
Yeah.
I think sometimes it's because it makes no sense and it's an update. So just as we frame redoing the regulations, I really want to get away from some of this controversy that isn't there,
Yeah, I
especially around statutory things that we have no control over. So even though we might all wish to really have an opinion, it doesn't matter in the context of the work that we're doing. So I want to make sure that we're doing good, genuine work that isn't just fear-based, that we're not touching anything because we're afraid that somebody's going to make up a theory about why we're touching something.
Yeah, I understand what you're saying, but there's a lot of things that need to be or are going to be changed regardless of our thoughts and our opinions. And we're going to have a hard enough selling
Yeah.
that.
I mean,
So let's not make our job any more difficult.
I agree. We still haven't talked about cannabis, so.
I mean, I do think it's worth bringing that up to the
Yeah.
rest of the commission and
Yeah,
because if
that's
we're
fair.
trying to bring this into statutory compliance, and that is something that we should address.
But
Cool.
we shouldn't do it. Yeah, we should just include everybody.
Yeah, let's circle back to it because I think there's probably some definitions around some of it too that should be
Yeah,
created.
tweak something, right?
Excellent, great,
And now
really.
can we suggest, go back to that next meeting then?
Yeah, I'll have it in my notes, definitely, because I'm sure the chair will want to hear what we discussed, but it's in my notes. I do have to say September is when I go on vacation and I'm not attending the meeting. And that's been a long-standing plan for like over a year, so I hope that you can all excuse me for a week.
Totally.
But I'll come back strong in October and make sure that we revisit everything that we need to brief everyone on.
Well, I mean, I think certainly if we just make a note of it, like things like this is a good thing that we can discuss in September. We can, spend
Yeah.
a meeting discussing this and some of the other pieces.
Great. Okay, so we won't talk permanent sawmill. We'll get to the end. Then we get into recreational campgrounds. This is all from page 41. And this is just a carryover of that exact language. I made one little question because it's saying that the commission may require a buffer strip. I'm not clear on what that is. I'm assuming it's landscaping. It just wasn't crystal clear, but otherwise leaving everything just as is.
I'm going to
So you
just
can only,
make. Oh, go ahead.
I'm just reading it. So you can only camp for 4 days.
Yeah, I saw that too. And I was curious about if that's kind of like policy, and I need a space right here, but I was curious about that because I was wondering, like, did this come before the campground? Like, was this a reaction to a specific campground? Was this always in the regulations? I would love the history.
We don't
I
have
don't
a
know.
campground in Cornwall, do we?
Exactly.
Yeah,
Well-
we do.
Which,
Where?
Mohawk
Mohawk.
campgrounds, which was visited by the Wetlands Commission and Anna about a month or so ago. It is a recreational campground that serves in some fashion the community, but it is a recreational campground. That's what it's really been looked at, because it has cabins and whatever, and they are in a residential zone, and they've existed for years and years, or have a religious affiliation. And they are probably going to come in and ask for some modification of what would make this facility more appropriate for education of kids, et cetera, et cetera. So campgrounds have kind of changed. You
Yeah.
have one that doesn't quite fit the bill, and I think it deserves a discussion at a later date as to what we now perceive as campgrounds that can be multi-use.
cool. No, that's such good info. So a lot of these things we'll probably revisit in the not too distant future. Again, carryover from page 41. We still have this room and board or bed and breakfast establishment. This definitely brings to mind, again, later discussion, not for tonight, addressing short-term rentals like Airbnb and VRBO, because the modern room and board is Airbnb and VRBO. So the regulations definitely address room and board more in the traditional sense, pre-internet. And I think just moving that discussion along at some point in time to understand how hoteling and staying in a small quaint inn has changed over time. The one thing that's weird that, again, I don't want to discuss or try to change tonight is just that additions can't be made to B&Bs or room and board structures of more than 200 square feet. That just seemed a little bit not in line with what other buildings can have. And I don't quite read into the intent on that one. So just maybe for a later date, as we talk about the modernization of room and board and bed and breakfast establishments, maybe to also discuss whether or not they're allowed to have additions.
Now,
but not-
remind me, you and I have to talk about this. I think we're missing an amendment to,
If there's a standalone amendment that I've yet to receive,
no, oh no,
Please,
it
please
fits
send
right
it.
in here to allow 5 bed and
Yeah.
breakfast units. Yeah. I need to talk to you about that because there's a
Sure.
problem.
yeah, well,
Mile
if
top.
there's, yeah, if there's a past amendment that I'm not aware of, it's a great time to just make everything all in one document.
Janelle, since this is a contemporary situation that's going on with these rental properties, is there a regulation by someone else that we might follow or take a look at in order to be able to update this to be more contemporary?
So,
So-
yeah, I mean, Airbnb really hasn't been tackled locally. Like, we can't look to Litchfield, Kent, or any surrounding town. Great Barrington recently touched on it as far as an ordinance goes, if you're asking more about the regulation of that use.
Yeah,
So that might be an example, but it's definitely with the perspective of limiting the availability just to ensure that the fabric of residential communities doesn't change. And also to ensure that long-term housing for permanent residents are also available. Because I'm sure, as you're seeing, just, result of the pandemic and so many other moving factors, our area is really attractive for many people, not only to visit for the short term, but also to relocate. So I think thinking that through in the context also of housing
Right,
and also economic development, like a lot of towns I feel probably haven't touched this because there are so many different angles and it's such a tricky one, and the enforcement piece is a monster. Because I'm sure Karen doesn't want to drive around looking at license plates at 6 a.m. or other things that people might have to do because of the regulation of Airbnbs. But the internet's always a really good enforcement tool from my experience, but it isn't a perfect one. Seeing what's happening in the tangible environment is also really, really helpful. So it's a tricky one. So many
Yeah.
towns have tried and then gotten into these heated discussions and sort of let it.
just put it in the
Yeah.
cellar.
And-
So, yeah, but this
and-
will have an impact on, available rentals for local people.
Mhm.
But there's another added piece that's kind of unique to the Western Hills. And I understand it a little bit because I had a daughter that was in medical school and needed to be far enough away from her apartment that she couldn't get there every day for 14 weeks. Similar to a lot of the nurses that are coming in that are doing stints at Sharon Hospital, where you need additional staff and you need rotating medical professionals in the community for safety purposes. And that has come up in Cornwall because
Yeah.
I've had phone calls on it. And it's a really interesting piece about how you're going to have a community that is going to support your older people, your emergency people, and whatever, when you do not have some sort of other form of housing, workforce housing, kind of like
Right,
Michelle brought up for agricultural workers, but there's a lot of need for support housing for the population that's in the Western Hills that doesn't have a hospital like a Hartford Hospital on the corner.
Yeah. I have seen some towns tackle it like via homeowners associations and other
Mhm.
ordinances to limit a stay so that it can't be shorter than a month's time. And that is also something, because concerns around the transient nature and also like the comings and going, that someone that has at least like a month at minimum. I've also seen some 6 months requirements that they'd be more integral into the community or there for a very, pointed reason, like Sharon Hospital on a quick visit for a very important work engagement rather than just like the weekend stay over. But again, in tackling these regulations, no one's finding like the perfect fix. No town is like, oh, the month versus the 6 months is absolutely perfect. It's foolproof. We've gotten rid of all the problems. It's just tricky. And especially our lake communities, there's a lot of discussion around what to do and how to kind of solve it.
Yeah, excuse me, so that actually, the town of Cornwall attempted some regulations around that. And, you know, I can't remember who else was on the commission then, but I think it was maybe 4 years ago, something like that. And then we kind of dropped it at that time, thinking that the state might step in and have some regulations that were going to supersede what we were going to do anyways.
Yeah.
Plus, it was very controversial, and the town was really divided on whether we were going to want to regulate Airbnbs or not. And there was,
But that was related to the appeal against my decision not to regulate them and the ZBA's finding that a customary stay in the town of Cornwall was 1 month. And that's hardly happens when you have a ski area that people come for 1 week, and that's part of Mohawk Mountain. It was a very controversial. ZBA said a customary rental in Cornwall was 1 month. And then
yeah, I mean, it was basically, obviously it didn't happen, and it, for a number of reasons probably, and that it was controversial, but I think we kind of stepped back saying that was our excuse of like, well, the state might come in to do something anyway, so let's just see what they might do. And
well, the state did come in and put the 15% tax on Airbnb in the state of Connecticut, which really changed a lot of the dynamics of what people were doing too.
yeah, if you were running around, there was a lot of them in town that listed anyway. So it wasn't, the town wasn't, you know, it's not blindsided by it now. We did look at it historically and then decided not to touch it.
James, I remember hearing that. Do you recall like what year-ish?
Yeah, you're about right. It was 2000, before COVID, obviously.
Yeah.
16.
Well, I think it was before me.
I could go back
Which is, I
and
think was before farming, so.
Before
it was.
farming.
Well, the farming regulations is sort of when I started. That was right when they sort of finished that.
Got it.
So it
Got
was
it.
probably before, I think you guys talked about it before
Dave
that. I remember
Colbert?
when there was discussions.
Yeah, Dave was a chair.
Colebrook.
Yeah.
Colebrook recently adopted, just as a side, and I have yet to really read them deeply or talk to their CEO about how they're enforcing them. But Colebrook did adopt regulations around Airbnbs for future discussion.
We sort of said that it wasn't up to Cornwall to write this regulation, and we took a
I
step
thought
back.
that seems not.
I can look, if
I
I had my full computer here, I could give you the absolute day because it was 3 months worth of me in front of the CBA. So, yeah.
Oh boy, yeah.
I would guess it was 2016, because when we bought our house, there was discussions about controversial Airbnbs and different things going on. So
I
I
think it
would
was
say it
2000,
probably was at
15,
least that
16.
far.
Got it. So forgive me guys, because as I look at page 44, I do see the numberings off. Again, I will fix that when we get to sort of a finalized finished product. But moving off of the Airbnb, that's definitely going to be a bigger discussion for another night. Temporary nonprofit political sponsored events comes in. And that is in the current regulations. It's short. It's just basically saying that a political party or a nonprofit can, without a zoning permit, hold an event, a fair, sporting event, or any similar affair on its premises for a period not extending 7 days. And this is for civic, religious, or philanthropic purposes. And then we also get into just issuing permits to any organizations for these events. Then we get into town or nonprofit sponsored affordable multifamily housing. The two elements that I highlighted were just a part of Public Act 2129, the recent statutory updates that forbids towns from capping the units oftentimes the topography or the site itself will naturally cap itself based upon septic and sewer. We are not currently have any access to the public water and public sewer resources. So it's understood that there's this cap that's natural that just comes from the lot and whatever a septic and water system can support. But eventually, I think getting rid of these arbitrary caps is what the state statute was really looking that the regulations do. I don't know if we want to do that at this juncture. It's really up to the commission if you want to get rid of the maximum average density at this point in time.
I don't think so. I think that would be a better, bigger town discussion.
Yeah. And I'm sure, I mean, just because there are so many conversations around multifamily housing, eventually to revisit that at a different time.
And that's actually still, I mean, 5 per acre is not limiting in the immediate sense anytime soon. We're not gonna get
I
a septic
know.
system to,
What's limiting is the cost of that septic system and the cost of any of that construction. Then we get into town or non-sponsored lots. So that will conclude this section. And I know in the past, Maggie attended a meeting and she really helped clarify what that meant. I actually didn't know, but a special permit is required if there's like Cornwall Housing Corporation comes in with a lot to develop as sort of their sponsored lot. So that's the final piece of this section. All the regulations, actually all the language from that section are intact from what they were. So again, not much new information this evening, but a lot of reorganization and putting all the specific use provisions into one place for easier use.
But if I'm
Nice.
correct in thinking, the big takeaways are going to be discussing the sawmill and
Yep.
and the whole accessory apartment section.
Yeah.
Those two big sections, right?
Yep. Like when we're gonna tackle accessory apartments. And then the one piece that I have yet to do, but when we are getting close to finishing the reformat, when one of these uses is mentioned within the use table, I'll actually reference C9.13 so that the explanation of the permitting process gets tied back in. So that's another piece to really make the document comprehensive and also so that it references other sections so that you don't just read one section and then think you're in the clear without additional requirements, but so that it's really understood for applicants and also for commissioners.
You know, was the accessory, I think at last month's meeting, wasn't the accessory apartment and all the statutory changes for affordable housing going to go? Didn't Anna suggest a subcommittee might be appropriate to vet it to
Yes.
begin?
Yeah, I don't know if that discussion happened at a meeting, but I did know in checking in with the chair to prepare for this month's meeting, she did bring that to my attention.
yeah, and that's also something I just thinking through, welcome to your opinions, but I would guess that if we're going to tackle something like the affordable housing piece, that would be a separate, you know, maybe after the new regs are adopted, then we tackle that instead of trying to tackle that piece at the same time that we're doing this reorganization.
It's a good point. We
Because-
we got we got pulled away from our task at hand a few times.
Yeah, it's nice if we can actually, I think it would give everybody a good sense of accomplishment if we got our new regs out and buttoned up, and then because it's not just the affordable housing piece that needs to be tackled, it's just that's the one that's on everybody's forefront of their mind, and it's appropriate to revisit it. But I think it would be a nice sense to get a sense of finality with at least readdressing our reformatting, and then move on as a commission to look at some of these other things that we want to tackle. That's my own 2 cents. But
I like that approach.
Yes.
Not that it matters, not that my opinion matters.
It
You're the one
does.
doing it.
But
It is
no,
nice
just,
to put a check mark though, done for something and
Yeah,
feel like,
yeah.
okay, that
Yes.
is done, cross it off the list.
yeah, and to really think of this as like the framework of what those changes will then funnel into, so that we have a document that's easy to work with, that is easy to use, so that when further changes get adopted, that the foundational work has been done.
Yeah, and we're getting close, like, let's
Oh,
not,
we're so close,
Yeah.
yes. I have to add one section, I realized, because we talk a lot about construction requirements, so there's gonna be a standalone construction requirements chapter. So I'm adding one more chapter than expected, but signs and parking is upcoming, and then we just have construction requirements and then administration and enforcement. So, I mean, we're very close.
okay.
How many,
Uh,
how many sections do you guys want for the meeting that I won't be present for?
Well, what's next? The signs, right?
Mhm.
Isn't that enough for us to argue about for an hour and a half?
It's- Yes, and that's.
Parking?
Well, I mean, if we're
Yeah.
gonna do that, plus talk about accessory apartments some and talk about, what we're doing around accessory apartment and talk about the sawmill thing, I think that'd be plenty.
Great, great. I'll get that all over to you.
Let's see, is that it for our planning workshop meeting? Thank
Yeah,
you, Janelle.
thank
Right
you.
on time.
Thank you.
One other question, so next month, are we meeting in person? Is that
Try to do that.
what's the consensus?
Maybe I will have a better idea as to what using the library is going to be.
Bruce's thumbs down on Bruce?
No,
No?
I love this. I love this.
I won't be at next month's meeting, so I'll leave you all to decide.
I would love to be in person.
Yeah.
If I were voting, I love in person.
Either
I
that,
actually
or
drove-
we could have a site walk meeting and just go look at some things in West Cornwall or Cornwall Bridge that might give some insight and signs and things like that.
Not a bad idea.
It's not gonna be
I-
like this much longer.
Yeah, because we could always use the Union down in West Cornwall if we wanted to, that we could have a special meeting and, early enough in the night, start early and have a site walk and then reconvene in some sort of Zoom, whatever fashion, and just have some on the ground experiences and sightseeing as to what's going on in between all the villages. Yeah.
And go have dinner at
Sounds-
Frank,
I don't want to miss that.
go have dinner at Frank afterwards, right?
Yeah.
Now you're talking.
Not on a Tuesday night.
But if we, so there are things that we would need to put in place if we were gonna change the format, because then we've got to let the public know that we're not Zooming, that we're actually meeting. We can't do it as a last minute, like, let's meet. So that's all. Yeah, Bruce.
So James, I have a question. I think the way that Janelle is presenting this on a screen, how would that work in person? I mean, this is so efficient the way it
Yeah, it's a
it
good
happens.
point.
I've got the old zoning
Yeah.
regulations up. I've got her screen up. I can move between my screens. It's just perfect. So
It's a good point.
That's it. Yeah, excellent point. Especially, and obviously, as you know, Bruce, these aren't typical meetings when we're going through a bunch of these planning workshops with a
Right,
document in
understand.
front. So I do hear you with that might be still the best option, or unless there's some kind of, if we're in person, then we've got to deal with the screen there that we're all looking at the same screen, or or we're printing out a lot of pages.
Yeah, I
and
was gonna
that can be
say,
pretty
maybe,
I think
cumbersome,
Well-
maybe we can get through this and then,
and then go back. in
after
person.
that's done, then we can start
Yeah.
our.
If your meetings are posted for Zoom or in person, with a place and, hybrid or whatever, it's something that we have to do always at the end of the year. And this year it was posted Zoom and or hybrid, blah, 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 whatever, Because
Yeah.
we don't know if there could be a COVID kickback and we might be back to Zoom. We don't know.
I would be
None-
hesitant to say it's truly gonna be hybrid unless we figure out the logistics of that first.
Yeah.
Well, Phil, I don't think you heard that the library is supposedly has all of that hybrid technology being worked on and is supposed to be ready in September. I believe it was thought, I think Anna thought it might be ready this month, but it is supposed to be up and running in September so that there would be, the hybrid potential.
I would not
that-
want to have that meeting until we went and played with it for an afternoon.
Yeah.
The library will be will probably have some sort of staff will have some sort of technical part
Yep.
of this. Yeah.
So it sounds like for next month, maybe we ought to still consider the Zoom option. Because we're still, and it's nice to have Richard video and the whole thing. We can all look at the video after. I mean, we all, I'm sure, want to get together in person to some extent down the road. But I do hear your point, Bruce. I think that's good about if we're just since this is the majority of our meetings is dealing with this the looking at our regs.
Yep.
This is a good format to be able to do that.
Yeah, I couldn't agree more. Maybe have the public hearing be in person.
Oh, yeah, yeah,
Yep.
for sure.
Yeah.
And obviously, this
Yeah.
is, I don't want to step on Anna's toes, let her.
Yeah.
I can see the possibility the public hearing might have to be at the gym even.
We'll take care of it, Phil. Really. I think the library is working very closely with all boards and commissions to try and provide hybrid piece. It's in the works in
All right.
discussion.
All right, shall we?
Yeah.
9:04, a little late.
Move to adjourn.
Second.
All in favor?
Aye.
Hi,
All right. Thanks, everybody.
thank
Good
you.
night.
Thank you, James.
Good
Yep.
night.
Bye.
Good night.
Bye, Richard. Go. Are you all set?
I'm ready